On England's southeast coast, anchored in the Blackwater estuary, is an illicit piece of pop culture history.
At first glance, this seems like a perfectly ordinary sight, a ship moored in a waterway that leads out to the sea. But look again. There's something here that doesn't quite add up.
It has this strange mast sort of sprouting out from its center. What can it be used for?
Looking below deck, inside is everything you would expect to find on an average ship.
With its wood paneling and brass instruments, the bridge feels like something from another era.
Other elements come as a little bit of a surprise. They really seem out of place here.
We find these strange machines, scattered microphones, record players, album covers. This is unmistakably a broadcast studio.
What were they broadcasting, and why was it so important to hide it?
Over the years, vessels like this were crewed by buccaneers, hell-bent on liberating the masses, not from their money, but from musical monotony.
There was a kind of joyful anarchy that took place on this ship, and the authorities decided to put this to an end.
I came out here in 1984 when I was in my 20s. The ship had only been at sea for about a year and a half or so, having been refitted in Spain. So it glistened in the sunlight and freshly painted, it looked absolutely splendid, and I was very excited to step on board.
Nigel Harris lived and worked on this former North Atlantic fishing trawler for 5 years. When he first boarded the vessel, the ship already had a storied past.
In 1976, she broke the world's record for biggest earnings from a single catch, sailing into port with 200 tons of cod in the hold.
But trawlers like this were becoming redundant. And in 1981, she was towed to a breaker's yard in Scotland, where she'd be stripped out for parts.
Still in good condition, the ship was spotted by a new buyer and put back to sea. But these were no fishermen. Nigel worked for an organization that operated on the wrong side of the law.
The authorities were keeping an eye on us all the time, and getting boats to bring our diesel out and finding skippers who would do it over and over again became more and more difficult. But when it worked, I'd say it did work well.
This is the Ross Revenge. In the 1980s, it was the latest in a long line of offshore pirate radio stations. The concept began as a cunning antidote to the British establishment's uptight attitude to 1960s popular music.
So we like to think of the 1960s as a great moment of change in music. We talk about the British Revolution, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and of course in the Americas, we have Motown music.
At that time, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, were the only ones with a license to broadcast on the radio.
But the rock and roll revolution sweeping the United States had no place on British airwaves. The BBC considered it to be immoral, favouring a bland diet of news and light entertainment. They would only play pop music for a few hours at the weekend.
All of these era-defining artists were releasing albums that people just weren't able to listen to on traditional, conventional radio.
We must remember that Radio 1 did not exist. So there was this massively underserved market. So this was a business opportunity.
The government refused to license independent broadcasters. But Irish music promoter Ronan O'Reilly was determined to find a way to break the BBC monopoly.
Whilst the government could shut down anyone broadcasting illegally on land, once you were in international waters, you were beyond their power.
O'Reilly raised £250,000 to launch his passion project. His new station soon began operating, 3 miles off the British coast.
When Radio Caroline first started broadcasting in 1964, They were at the forefront of the pirate radio revolution. Suddenly, music fans could tune in and hear new artists whenever they wanted.
By 1965, around 15 million Brits were tuning in to offshore pirate radio on a daily basis. The BBC didn't like it, and neither did the British government.
Over the following decades, the authorities and the pirates played a game of cat and mouse, with the government passing new laws to shut them down and the pirates finding new ways to keep the music playing.
In 1980, Radio Caroline's latest ship, the Mi Amigo, sank during a violent storm. The team needed a new boat. Enter the Ross Revenge.
Official broadcast of the new Radio Caroline began at noon on August 20th, 1983.
This studio you see now is the main on-air original studio on the Ross Revenge. This is the mixer we used and still works, as far as I know. Microphone, faders here for turntables. It was a great place to be, lots of fun out here. I used to play a lot of Steely Dan and Fleetwood Mac. Electric Light Orchestra has always been a favourite.
Ross Revenge didn't just house Radio Caroline, but also other radio stations.
Well, the Dutch service operating from Studio 2 next door here on the Ross Revenge was, in my day, called Radio Monique, and they were based in Holland, all secret again, all under the cover of darkness, so to speak.
But Radio Caroline was treading a fine line, and the British and Dutch government's patience was running out.
Over time, things did get more complicated. The authorities became more wary of boats getting out here, so the time between our supply boats would get longer and longer and longer as things became more difficult.
Throughout the summer of 1989, Radio Caroline kept on broadcasting, despite increasing harassment from the authorities.
On August 18th, a ship chartered by the UK government pulled up alongside the Ross Revenge, asking to come aboard and discuss the ship's future. When the crew rejected their demands, it returned to port.
The next day, when Nigel was hosting his morning show, all hell broke loose.
I was on the air in here, and it was a misty morning, and I looked through that porthole out to the stern of the ship, and through the mist, this great big Dutch tug appeared. It came alongside, slammed alongside.
Faced with a 30-strong armed boarding party, the small crew were in no position to stop them.
We have been boarded by the Dutch authorities. We are in desperate need of help. We are in international waters. This is a breach of this vessel's right to be here. And I desperately plead for help. We need help now.
There were 2 or 3 of us in here, and they came in, manhandled us out of the studios, closed the door on us, and then started to pull wires out of the back of the mixer. I just don't understand how this can be happening. It's a strange feeling in your stomach that, is this the end? It can't be.
At 1:08 p.m, the Ross Revenge was silenced, and Radio Caroline had gone off the airways.
While the pirate crew was rounded up and interrogated, the authorities went to work.
Studio equipment, records and tapes were all boxed up and confiscated. They even cut the aerial cables from the tower.
They knew that they couldn't remove the massive transmitters held below decks, so they simply took sledgehammers to the delicate electronics.
When the raiders had finally gone, Nigel was left to assess the damage.
We saw beer bottles lying around everywhere, so it was almost like they come out here on a bit of a jolly. Bit of drinking, a bit of smashing, and then they went home.
The pirate DJs didn't give up. They scavenged replacement parts and quickly got back on air.
We had so much help from listeners as well. They donated food, they donated records.
But the writing was on the wall. In November 1990, the ship was forced to stop broadcasting due to a lack of fuel and essential supplies. It was left anchored in the English Channel to await its fate.
In 1991, the Ross Revenge lost its moorings and began to drift onto a sandbank. And when the ship was eventually towed into port, its 27-year broadcast history came to an end.
Pirate radio, although illegal, is credited with paving the way for popular music to be given a voice in the United Kingdom. The Ross Revenge is part of that legacy.
Today, the Ross Revenge is open to the public for visits, but keeping a ship of this size in good condition is no easy feat.
Well, there's still a lot of work to be done on the Ross Revenge. Can't sit on the water forever. Unless this work is done, its future is uncertain.